Good morning and welcome to this Green Shipping Corridors Route to a Zero Emission Future conference. My name is Catherine Palmer and I am the shipping lead at the UN High-Level Climate Champions team for COP26. My role today is to moderate this conference, take us through a series of presentations and panel discussions and take us into a networking session towards the end. So my role is to take us through this conference, ensure that it runs smoothly and seamlessly, and that as the audience, you gain valuable insight into the opportunities for green shipping corridors. This session is being recorded and the link will be shared with the audience at a later date. Your microphones and cameras are disabled, but as we do have an interactive networking session at the end, we hope you're all able to join that session and discuss further with our speakers and panelists. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Chris Barton, the UK's Trade Commissioner for Europe. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Catherine, and good morning. Bonjour, buenos dias, everybody. There are too many countries represented here to go through all the languages, which is a good sign. A welcome on board this conference on green shipping corridors organised by the UK government. My name is Chris Barton. I'm the UK's Trade Commissioner for Europe, and I lead a team of around 340 people based in 34 countries. And we work with business and governments across the continent to remove barriers to trade and to support the trade and investment between the UK and other European countries. So it's a real pleasure to speak at this event today on the shipping industry, which of course is integral to international trade. Shipping accounts for 80% of international trade generally by tonnage, and for the UK, that figure is unsurprisingly even higher at 95%. Sea transport services also is an important sector in and of itself, worth a total £17 billion in 2019, similar in value to the UK's trade in computer services. And being vital for trade means that shipping is also vital for our economic recovery and prosperity, helping to drive economic growth and create jobs. So you're in the right place. Now, our mission in DIT Europe is to encourage more trade between the UK and Europe. And it's my job as Trade Commissioner to work with all of you to achieve that. And that's a mission that matters because trade and investment drives economic growth, it creates jobs, and it improves living standards. And Europe is a great place in which to fulfill this mission, as over half of the UK's exports are sold to other European countries, and over half of investment into the UK comes from them. And now is a great time to do so as well. We've established the basis for our new trading relationships with the UK-EU Trade and Cooperation Agreement and multiple UK FTAs beyond the EU. The beginning of the end of COVID restrictions is in sight, and we have important shared goals such as addressing climate change and levelling up. But I guess, as we all know, it's not all plain sailing at the moment. The onset of the pandemic caused a sharp drop in trade, and we'll need to continue to focus our energies on encouraging exports for economic recovery. And the ongoing volatility of demand has, among other factors, led to supply chain bottlenecks and logistics problems, and the cost of shipping has increased as a result. And in this blustery environment, one urgent challenge continues to stand out, and that is, of course, climate change. Only last month, the Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change became the latest expert organisation to stress that significant and immediate cuts in greenhouse gas emissions are needed to avoid the dire impacts that global warming will bring. Shipping is already one of the more sustainable ways of moving goods, though much more needs to be done to cut the 2% carbon emissions that shipping produces globally each year. In the UK, domestic shipping alone produces more greenhouse gases than rail and buses combined, and globally, maritime trade is expected to double over the next decade. So my colleague from the Department for Transport, Joe Boyland, will shortly talk more about climate risks and the crucial COP26 Summit that will take place in just 6 weeks' time in Glasgow. and what the UK government is hoping to achieve there. I think it's important to remember that there are major economic and wider opportunities here too, though. Rebuilding from the pandemic brings enormous opportunities to encourage clean growth in the shipping industry. And the UK is already leading the way, having recently become the first country to include shipping emissions in its carbon budget. And we'll hear from our expert speakers today how momentum for change has already begun to build elsewhere in the sector. So, for example, 2 weeks ago, we saw at London International Shipping Week that the maritime industry is bursting with innovation. Pioneering enterprises are already creating and actually already testing the green maritime technologies of the future. And a great example of this are the winners of the UK Clean Maritime Demonstration Competition, who we'll hear from later. It's these kinds of companies and these kinds of technologies that will help accelerate the journey to zero emissions shipping in Europe and allow us to achieve the twin goals of more trade and clean trade. I also look forward to the panel discussions where I'm sure we will also touch on what more governments can do to foster faster change. After all, we all have a part to play in this. So thank you once again to all of the speakers, especially you, Catherine, for moderating this conference, and for all you are doing to support ambitious COP26 outcomes and a cleaner shipping industry. I hope you all very much enjoy the conference, and thank you.
Thank you very much to Chris for that opening address to this conference. I think he very much set the tone of this conference and highlighted the key issues and the key opportunities that we have as we move forward on shipping's route to be zero emission. We now have two presentations that really highlight the action that the UK government is taking and also provide some insight into the feasibility of green corridors as a route to take. So I'd like to start by handing over to Joe Boyland, who is from the UK Department of Transport.
Thank you very much, Catherine, and thank you all for joining us this morning. Delighted to be able to speak to you today about the UK's Clydebank Declaration. Just while I am pulling up my slide deck to give a bit of an overview of the work we're doing on this, just wanted to quickly introduce myself. So, yeah, as I said, my name is Joe Boyland. I am our COP26 lead for Maritime here at the UK Department of Transport. And so I have two main responsibilities. In the first instance, leading on the two initiatives that the UK government will be launching for Maritime at COP26, and also providing kind of policy input for the events plans that we have. So I will just pull up my slide deck now. So just wanted to provide a bit of background on what exactly it is that we're doing here at DFT Maritime for COP26. So maybe it doesn't need saying, especially to this audience, but the UN body responsible for tackling climate change from the perspective of the shipping industry is, of course, the IMO and not the UNFCCC. And this kind of raises, I think, a valid question about the role of maritime at COP26. We view COP26 as a really timely opportunity to bring government and industry together to make progress in reaching zero emission shipping. And I think this is for three reasons, really. Timely because, of course, we are rapidly approaching the review of the IMO's initial strategy for decarbonising shipping in 2023. Also, innovation in shipping decarbonisation technology has continued at pace. We now have technologies reaching sort of mid-technology readiness level. And then third, also, of course, COP26 is seen as a major moment, and the eyes of the world will very much be on Glasgow. Fair to say that the shipping industry doesn't always get the press we might like. And hopefully this provides us a bit of an opportunity to set that straight and do something really, really positive. And so for these reasons, the UK wants to seize the timely opportunity with some ambitious initiatives to be launched at the conference. The first initiative is called Operation Zero, and this focuses on the steps we can take in the immediate term to decarbonise the maritime sector. And the goal here is to kind of convene an industry coalition to accelerate the decarbonisation of the North Sea's offshore wind operations and maintenance vessels. Perhaps more pertinently for the discussion today, we're also focusing on a piece of work in the mid to long term called the Clydebank Declaration, which encourages governments to support the establishment of green shipping corridors. We're also working on a number of events, and I should mention as well that the UK is a core member of the Zero Emission Shipping Mission under Mission Innovation 2.0. The Climate Declaration will be the green corridor element under that mission, and we're working with our partners in the mission to make sure that that also has a platform at COP26. So I think I might try a workaround for the issue with the slides, and I'm going to share my entire screen if that's okay with our technical wizards in the background. This was the reason why I wanted to make sure that we had the slides up, because I wanted to move on to what exactly we are talking about with green corridors. It's a concept that's been around for some time. Kind of in the most basic terms, it could be defined as a decarbonised maritime route between two ports, as very nicely illustrated by this visualisation from the Getting to Zero Coalition. Purely illustrative. This happens to be a kind of transatlantic route, but we very much envisage this to be a global endeavour. The second question that I wanted to ask was why green corridors? So that's what they are. What's the value? Really what we're trying to do with the Clydebank Declaration, with our work on corridors, is to implement action being undertaken at the IMO to enable zero emission shipping on two levels. So starting with the political level, by kind of kickstarting work on green corridors through commitments from governments, we hope the declaration will decisively demonstrate that it is possible to decarbonise maritime in the near term and thereby raise levels of ambition at the IMO. Secondly, also in creating the corridors, we will of course be also creating a living lab of sorts, something that can generate not just theoretical but real world data on what it's like to run zero emissions vessels that can be fed meaningfully into the next phase of IMO regulations to ensure that they're high quality. So that's on the political level, and that's important. Also, we're hoping to bring about some of the necessary change on the ground over the next decade by hopefully providing a bit of a tipping point for the development of refueling infrastructure. We know that the vast majority of the investment that's going to be required for transition in the maritime sector will be on the land side, and so hopefully we can do our bit to start to build that. Also, we hope to improve and scale technologies here, which, as I mentioned, are reaching higher TRLs, and vitally prove the safety of zero emission shipping. So what's our proposal? Well, what we are hoping to launch at COP26 is a high-level political declaration that does two things. In the first instance, by signing, governments state their intent to establish green corridors in partnership and collaboration with industry, I should stress. But we're also providing a bit of a framework and a kind of a recognised process for how one collaborates on green corridors, which hasn't thus far existed, namely sign the declaration, form a partnership, and then review, expand, and knowledge share at future COPs. And also setting common parameters. It's very important that as we move in to the next decade's worth of action, and we think green corridors will be key, that we're all working on the same basis, from the same page. And I should state at this point that the industry, as you may have gleaned, this is a state-focused initiative. Industry do not directly sign the declaration. However, involvement from industry will be absolutely key to making green corridors a success, which is why I'm so happy to be speaking to you today. Broadly speaking, just to go into a little bit more detail, the declaration can be broken down into four parts. We have a preamble, which stresses the obvious need for action, our support as signatories for the IMO initial strategy, highlights the recent findings of the IPCC report that we're all too aware of, And then also a couple of other sections, not least the mission statement, which is that signatories aim to establish at least 6 corridors by the middle of this decade, scaling up activity in the following years to make sure that we're on track and that this is a robust initiative. And then also a series of pledges, namely to facilitate the establishment of public-private partnerships to form green corridors, identify and explore actions to address the barriers to the formation of those corridors, and ensure consideration of environmental impacts in pursuing these corridors. So that was the overview. Just to jump in and kind of elaborate on some of those points. Wanted to go back to the timeline point there. So we mentioned that the goal here is to establish 6 corridors by the middle of the decade. Just to speak to that and where that's come from is we've kind of developed that in conversation with the Global Maritime Forum, who you may be aware are conducting feasibility studies and are kind of very much in the work on green corridors at the moment. And so this was developed with them, and we think that figure of 6 is what we need to stay on course on the kind of proper trajectory for zero emission shipping late in the decade and indeed later in the century. Just to give an indicative idea of where we go from there, and I should state that beyond this we are kind of exceeding the declaration. We might expect a kind of a network of demonstrations to be in place by 2030 and then accelerated zero on specific routes 2030 plus. However, the faster we go, the better, of course, and it would be for the individual public-private partnerships to determine the exact rate of change. To speak to that partnerships that I keep mentioning and what exactly they entail, who should be in them? Well, I think it's important to state that there are 2 types of partnerships that we're looking at here and very much open to. There's a bilateral or plurinational type, which consists of 2 or more signatories working with an industry consortium made up of ports, operators and others in the value chain. And there's also a domestic model, which is very similar, however you have 1 signatory. Just to speak to the operator point there, we are primarily looking at ferry, container, tanker and bulker segments as the first movers. They've been identified as such in the growing research on green corridors, and we're keen to stay aligned to that where possible, but we are very much open to other segments. I think our preferred option is the bilateral plurinational one, just insofar as there's more of a gap, a challenge, but also an opportunity for the international routes. Domestic action is, of course, easier to undertake without a framework such as this. There's also an annex at the end that I neglected to mention earlier. Just to speak to this quickly, it's absolutely critical in our view that this work leads to real decarbonisation. And so a theme here is that the fuels used on the corridors should eventually be true life cycle zero emissions. This doesn't preclude the use of non-zero life cycle fuels, your blue hydrogens and the like, in the short term, just so long as the partners in the relevant partnership are clear and transparent that this is a short-term step and the goal remains to achieve a fully decarbonised route. We are exploring governance for this piece, and what we are looking into specifically is to set up a cadence around future COPs to make sure that Maritime has a continued presence at COPs. And the function would be twofold: to celebrate the success of Maritime in taking action on corridors, checking in the progress on existing routes and also announcing new ones, but also enabling knowledge sharing, which will be key. We are not, however, proposing a UK secretariat. We want this to have a life of its own. This isn't something, green corridors isn't something the UK wishes to own. It's something that we want governments to own together and for the concept to really spread. Our progress, so official level engagement began in March, and we've had really positive dialogue with, almost uniformly positive dialogue with states across North America, Europe, Asia and the Pacific. We do really want this to be a global and diverse initiative and representative in that way. So we're also very keen to talk to partners, and we've been reaching out to partners in Central and South America and Africa. And we believe that a strong number of the partners that we've spoken to thus far, the states, are advising the ministers and just about finalising sign up. So hopefully we'll have a really good launch at COP26. And then very finally, we've spoken quite a lot about what's in this for states and the kind of state aspect of the work, but I wanted to contextualize it for the audience here. The kind of the obvious question: why should I get involved as a member of industry? What we're doing here is facilitating first movers. We know that the sector has the ability and the ambition to deliver zero-emission shipping. Just looking at kind of recent maritime announcements, it's very, very clear. But it needs, amongst other things, clarity about the demand for portside infrastructure if you're an operator, and if you're a port, the supply. And the supply of zero-emissions fuels if you're an operator, and if you're a port, the demand for those fuels. So this is the classic chicken and egg problem, and they also need, of course, relevant support from governments. And this is exactly what we want the Green Corridors and the Clydebank Declaration to provide, by linking together all of those players and facilitating a dialogue about barriers, needs, what can be done to overcome them. We're not suggesting a one-size-fits-all approach here in terms of that government support, I should say. There's no one package that governments would be deploying, and this is just because of the very practical reasons that we're talking about different timescales for the corridors, different lengths and types of routes, as well as different technology solutions. So it's really down to the partners in question. If this is something that you're interested in working on, what I would advise is for you to please contact your government about the declaration. Hopefully they will have heard about the piece and be very interested, if not already signed up. And so it'd be great to start those conversations about partnerships. Networking sessions after, if anyone has any questions, please do just ask.
Thank you very much, Joe. And as you highlighted there, questions to Joe can be asked in the networking session at the end. But that was really insightful, and thank you for highlighting the approach and intent of the UK government with the Clydebank Declaration, and also highlighting how industry has a significant role to play in this, and that's something we'll delve a little bit deeper when we get into the panel sessions. So I'd like to now move to our second presenter this morning. So I'd like to introduce Camillo Valandria from the University College of London, who will present some analysis on the feasibility of green corridors. So over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Catherine. Thank you very much, guys, for the invitation. This is a great opportunity to show the work that we have done in collaboration with the Global Maritime Forum and the Getting to Zero Coalition. So I hope you enjoyed the presentation. My boss, Tristan Smith, has asked me to participate and explain the work that he has been leading and that I've been working on supporting him. So thank you very much. All right, just to make sure that I don't have any technical issues. Can you guys see my screen? Can you? Cool. Right. So we've been working on identifying first mover routes throughout the year, and with an initial look at hitting the 5% target on zero emission fuels by 2030. That was work that we have also done for Global Maritime Forum. We basically believe that to be able to have full penetration of zero emission fuels by 2050, we need to first hit this 5% milestone by 2030. And then that gives us an immediate target to try to come up with how to do it. So what questions do we need to answer now that we know what the target is? Well, which and where are the lowest hanging fruits, as we call them, the first movers routes? How much reduction potential they account for, just so that we have an idea of whether it's reachable or whether we have more than enough, and what will it take to harness it? This in terms of hydrogen production and distribution networks. So now I need to make a disclaimer on why we think that a route to net zero will have to go through hydrogen. This is because basically all the fuels that we understand will be net zero at the middle of the century will have to be based on hydrogen production. We are happy to discuss the assumptions around this on the panel session. So how do we do that? So, well, basically, we look at the 50,000 plus vessels in the global fleet with AIS data, and then looked at the routes. And what we need to do is try to estimate their energy demand. and give it a geographical location. This is basically us saying we depart from a very basic assumption. It has some implications. We understand that that's not necessarily how the shipping system works, but we assume that if you can account for all the energy consumed by a vessel to be provided at the port of departure, then you will have a geographical location for that energy demand. And then you can start looking at how to aggregate it in which will be provided by green corridors and how to reach this 5% target by 2030. So what we have done is the map on the right shows clusters of 8 clusters of energy demand around the world. These are aggregated based on the energy demand of the clusters that belong, of the ports that belong to the cluster, and the distances. That's the first step, right? So to aggregate energy demand in a geographically speaking. But then since we need to go through hydrogen production, then it makes sense to understand in which country there will be a high potential of hydrogen production. And this is what the second map shows. So this is work done for the World Bank. It's a report that was published this year, in which the World Bank basically suggests which will be the prime countries for hydrogen production in the short term. So what we do is we connect the two maps to get an idea of how the routes will have a strong chance of being developed. So now that we have the connection between the two, we can start looking at operational patterns. And this is what this slide shows. So we are looking at operational patterns in 3 levels. So we are thinking of local shipping, bilateral shipping, and liners. And now liners, when we say liners, we don't talk only about containers. We understand that this is an assumption that the industry might take. But what we understand as liners here is as of vessels that behave like a bus with predefined stops. So just to explain the 3 operational methods, the first one is intracluster or local. Is the map on the top right. This is a sample of vessels operating off the coast of Brazil. So what we have here is that these vessels don't stop at a single port, but they stop at ports nearby. So what we are assuming is that if there is a cluster that includes all these ports, then and they are provided somehow with the fuel that will be needed for these vessels, they don't really need to go elsewhere. So any efforts on developing the production capacity and infrastructure can be focused in that region. The next level up will be bilateral shipping, and that is what is shown on the map on the bottom right. So this is the activity of a group of vessels between the Hawaiian Islands and the cluster of the California. So you can see that the cluster of California includes the ports of San Francisco and San Diego. But so what we are assuming here is that if there is a way to harness the potential of those ports as a cluster, then we will be able to capture a higher energy demand. Then the final map on the left is that of, in this case, is liners that stop at 3 or 4 clusters, but this is a special case because this is a subgroup of vessels that stop at 3 or 4 clusters, but for which these clusters belong to the same country. So this will be basically vessels that, although operate long journeys on clusters, on more than 3 clusters, they will still be classified as domestic shipping, which is an opportunity to leverage the potential from individual political stakeholders. So now that I have explained the way in which the methodology is assessed, let me show you some of the results. These results will be published in the short term in the transition strategy that's been developed by the Getting to Zero Coalition and the Global Maritime Forum. So you will be able to read more about this in detail in that report. But what we have found is that basically we expect that using this methodology, 10.6% of the current energy demand of the shipping energy system will be harnessed by what we call these first route movers with a strong reduction potential. However, we need to go a little bit further into the details of this, because it's not the same that if we assume liners that stop at four ports, just like in the table shows, that can stop at 20 ports. It might be easier just to go first for intra-cluster local shipping and bilateral. So these two subgroups account for around 3.2% of the global shipping system, and it might be better to look at this first and identify where they are, so that the right steps can be taken forward. Then a further 7.44% is taken by liners, which is the biggest proportion of the potential. Now, another way to look at this data is at how much of this, regardless of whether it's operational classification, whether it's local, bilateral, or liners, whether this is actually domestic shipping. So what we found is that about 3.7% of this 10.6% is domestic only shipping. So this is vessels that only operate in a single country. That's a very good news. And 1.1% is from domestic shipping for vessels that might operate internationally as well. So this is vessels that might cross borders, but sometimes will operate just in ports that are local to themselves. So this is some of the main findings that we got for the transition strategy, but then we can go a little bit deeper into a more detailed analysis of the results. So what would be the top routes? And by routes here, we understand again, using this classification of intra-cluster, bilateral, trilateral, or the liners, where we can aggregate energy demand. So what we have found is that there will be around 73 routes that will need to be identified, that will need to be decarbonized to hit the 5% target. But the first 15 alone can hit an aggregated decarbonization target of around 2.7%, which is very relevant. So when you take this into account, then you need to consider that the fuel that will need to be provided in terms of hydrogen, you can look at the table here, is in the order of 100,000 tons per year. To provide enough energy for these ports, for this cluster, sorry. But then you need to take into account how much of a catchment area you will need to cover. And this is what the second column, the second to last column in the table tries to show, is basically that you have places that concentrate a lot of energy demand, but might have a wider network of ports to cover. So perhaps the way to look at this is which areas have higher concentration of energy demand in a smaller area of ports. Finally, so I believe we are running out of time. It's looking at vessel type. So despite of what one might have assumed about the way in which the regularity of trading is done, the top three vessel types showing in our results are actually bulk carriers, containers, and ferries. Now, originally we were expecting containers to come on top, but what happens is that bulk carriers, being reasonable sized vessels covering long distances between, say, Brazil and Asia, or Australia and China, will have a high energy demand. Container comes second, and the reason why they come second and they don't come up top is because they do a lot of stopping at ports and countries that might not have a strong hydrogen potential production. And then ferry RoPax will be the interesting one. I think that this was an expected result because they take over the majority of the potential for local shipping. So if you look at only local shipping, it's mainly ferry RoPax vessels that cover that. So what's important from this, what we find important or interesting from these conclusions, that only these three vessel types account already for 7% of first mover route segregation, which might be of an interest to inform the onboard machinery debate and around what would be the kind of machinery and sizes that will need to be focused on to be able to harness these first movers routes. So just to summarize, the challenge that we got into with this project was to find a way to reach 5% of earlier reduction routes by 2030. What we did was we look at the way in which the voyages of the fleet in the world operate, and try to link it to a regularity among H2 potential. And the finding is that yes, it's doable. 10.6% is possible. We found that the largest proportion of energy concentrates in a few countries, so this gives us way to think about individual or bilateral arrangement between these countries. And then that 7% of first mover potential is contained by 3 vessel types, bulkers, containers, and ferries. So it was a lot to put on into a single presentation. I hope I covered it well. But by any means, if you guys have any questions, I will be available in the networking event. So thank you very much.
Great, thank you so much. And as Camilio said, he would be available in the networking session for those who want a deeper dive into the analysis that has just been presented. But I think that really shows and will help inform where we need to put our effort in order to establish these first green corridors and on a route to be able to achieve the 5% breakthrough target of zero carbon fuel by 2030. So what I'd like to do now is start our first panel discussion. Our first panel is going to focus on the opportunities and barriers for green corridors for the ferry sector, and that is both passengers and cargo. So we have some great panelists. We have 2 ports represented. So we have Barcelona and Piraeus. We have 2 ferry companies. We have Brittany Ferries and Grimaldi. And we also have energy provider Petronor. So so what I'd like to do is I'd like to open up our panel discussion by going to Vincent from Brittany Ferries. We've just seen in that analysis and presentation that some of the first mover opportunities exist for those that operate locally between 2 locations. So as a ferry, short sea ferry operator, I'd like to ask you what you see as the opportunity and what you would need in order to be able to make this happen.
Thank you, Catherine. Just to introduce my company in a nutshell, well, we at Brittany Ferries operate around 12 ships in the central and western channel, so between France and UK, but also in Spain and Ireland. The 12 ports we operate are generally not the biggest ones. They're located in mid-size or small cities, and well, it's our understanding that the Green Corridors initiative is open to every ports and routes and not only focused on big harbors or big link as previous programs did. Well, therefore, we kind of welcome this opportunity, which can only help us in our decarbonization program. To your question, what would be needed? Why? We definitely don't need anything more from regulation. I think we had enough this year with CII, XI, and upcoming European regulation. So, well, obviously, the answer is funding. But to go further than that, well, I would say that technical maturity is a prerequisite. But I think these are the same needs for any sector, I would say. So maybe it's probably even more important in the ferry industry, though. Ferries are, because the ferry ships are very expensive ships to build, and most important even, they are operated much longer than ships of other sectors, bulkers, tank, container ships. they really are long-term investment ships. We're talking 30, 40 years investments. So when it comes to such a structural decision, which fuel will I use to decarbonize, you need visibility, and that's where technical maturity become even more important. And obviously, fundings to help implement this alternative solution. So in this regard, the Green Corridors opportunity can ensure that the other actors involved, they also commit into one direction. I mean, whatever it is, hydrogen, methanol, ammonia, or biofuels. And I'm not only talking about building the necessary infrastructure, but also and especially securing the fuel supply. Such decarbonization projects involves many actors, and the Green Corridors initiative, in my opinion, should help a lot with coordination. By coordination, I mean coherence, complementarity between the solutions provided by each port. I mean, you don't want to have one port developing a full ammonia infrastructure, whereas the other one is all about supplying liquid hydrogen. Well, or maybe you do. Maybe because you have two different ships on that link. I don't know. All this needs to be coordinated. It's also essential for technical studies and safety assessments. You don't want to have one solution that is accepted on one side and not on the other one. Another point that we might not think of is acceptance by public and communication. I mean, ferry terminals are usually not located in industrial ports, but rather in remote locations, dedicated harbors, or on the contrary, directly in the city centers. So public acceptance of these new fuels, methanol, ammonia, and hydrogen, can be problematic. We already experimented it with the LNG. So coordinating communication on the matter is important. Since we are on a ferry panel, I'd also like to point out another specificity of our activity. It's that our cargoes, our clients, they're doing the same journey, the same trip towards zero emissions. We're talking here about transporting electric and hydrogen vehicles. So in a near future where the majority of our clients' vehicles will need electricity or hydrogen charging, I think a zero emission corridor must include these needs. As charging takes much more time than usual refueling, one might say, well, let's use ship's electricity and the time on board to charge these vehicles. But it's, well, definitely unrealistic to imagine charging all the vehicles on board. It's not going the same way. It would not help our decarbonization. So, well, this need to be thought of also. And well, I don't know, maybe one last word of why ferry is a good candidate. Well, as it was mentioned earlier, we operate the same ports with a high frequency, which it makes it easier and maybe more viable to implement new fuels. And well, also the length of our routes. I mean, we need less fuel. Our routes are shorter in comparison with deep sea shipping. So it makes it's technically more easy to implement those zero carbon fuels. Thank you very much.
Thank
Great, thank you, Vincent. I think you've highlighted some key challenges bespoke to the ferry operators, but also highlighted that some of these challenges will be unique across all sectors of shipping. And I think what I'd like to do is bring in Arturo from Petronor. So one of the other things we've been shown is that green corridors are most likely to be established first where they are close to where there's green hydrogen potential. So maybe you can add some context and some thoughts around the work that Petronor is doing in developing green hydrogen projects, but also how you see the marine market being able to support those green hydrogen projects that you're involved in.
Thank you, Catherine. Good morning. Well, trying to answer the second question first, I'm focusing on that one. How can the marine market support in unlocking hydrogen projects? I would say that any renewable hydrogen project faces three major problems or barriers: the cost of renewable energy, cost of infrastructure, and then the existence of a market or customers. Well, the first two are common for our projects, although there are regions that may be favored by the cost of renewable energy compared to other regions, but they are, I would say they are common. So that's not the point, in my opinion. In relation to the market right now, it is just a small mature hydrogen market, which I would say is just the chemical sector, and that is why many promoters are or have already approached us, the refining sector, to launch their projects. So now moving to the transport sector, I would say that it is usually difficult to get large clients with big orders that make a hydrogen project sustainable. Here, however, Maritime could be an exception to this. For example, the commitment of a shipping company to decarbonize a sea route could enable large hydrogen projects because of their scale. So as a direct answer to the question, Catherine, I would say that the demand, the scale of a sea route will unlock important hydrogen projects. With respect to our projects, well, I think we have already announced them. I think you might have heard or read about our e-fuel plants that we have announced in Bilbao port. Also, we are involved in some hydrogen projects in the refinery with intention on using our hydrogen demand in order to launch our big scale electrolyzers, and using that advantage, then providing hydrogen to other customers that maybe use it in transport, any kind of transport. And if we have the opportunity to launch any project with any company in Bilbao port in order to decarbonize any sea route, it will be wonderful. Well, I just said that.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think, like you said, some the cost of infrastructure and the cost of renewable energy is going to be critical to the sustainability of the production of green hydrogen, and like you said, the marine market is a great example of a good quality market that can help with the scale of demands that can help to unlock some of this potential. So if I move now to Chrysanthi from Piraeus port, I'd like to ask you what you see as the role of ports in enabling green corridors, as you can provide that critical link between the producer and the end user. So how do you see the role of the port?
Thank you, Catherine. Thank you also for the invitation. Actually, ports are at the crossroads of the supply chain, as we all know. And the greening of shipping seems to be the primary goal nowadays. The ports understand that reducing emissions.
Chrysanthi, can I just step in? I think
ports have
we're losing you a little bit.
With the local communities.
Can
contribute to this objective.
I think we're losing Chrysanthi a little bit, and she's breaking up. So maybe while we solve that connection,
you can hear me.
I shall move on to
yes.
I'll bring in Mario from Grimaldi and seek another ship owner's perspective on this, because Vincent picked up on the point around coherence and coordination. And so there is this element of, I guess, risk sharing for those first mover projects across the partners. And so I would just like to seek your view as a ship owner, what you see as the main incentives that the ship owner would need, and how you can look at that, view the risk sharing across the partnerships.
Good morning to everybody. I'm Mario Massarotti, Managing Director of Grimaldi Spain. Thanks for inviting us to this interesting meeting. I also want to share more or less what is doing our company. We are an international company with 130 ships operating mostly all over the world, apart from Australia and Far East, let's say. And I also have to say that we are very much involved in the short sea trades, where we are investing since more than 30 years. So we are very much involved in this business. First of all, I would like to say that we have to say that shipping, and this must be clear, is the most sustainable way of transport of goods, because in the shipping we are transporting 95% of all goods in the world, and we are with a consumption of 3% of the petrol of production. So it's very important to understand that we are in the process, still in a process of try in a different way of transport to implement shipping as a different way of transport. And there is still much to do in this sense. If we see for example, I mean, we are in the process of receiving 12 new green vessels, with this a huge investment of almost 800 million euro, with a new generation, and this is for petrol. They are engined with obviously with petrol, because at the moment we do not see a possibility of a full decarbonization. So we are in a very delicate moment where we are studying, but there is not still the technology. So there is a big question mark in the future. We have been working a lot also with the government and with the port authorities and all the stakeholders, because all of them is involved in this big change. For example, also in terms of infrastructure and in terms of regulation, we believe that the most important thing to do is to give a premium to the shipping line who is investing in more sustainable technology, and so that is having less emission and is giving obviously from a more sustainable service. This is something that is absolutely necessary. For example, I have to say in Spain, we have a best practice because when a shipping line, because we have, new vessels, very efficient from a consumption point of view, but also we have also another system. When we go in the port, we have batteries in these vessels, and so when we are in ports, we do not have any emission at all. So we have zero emission when we are in port, and obviously also being in the center of the city, many of these ports is very important. Also where you have the pollution, where you produce your pollution. And in Spain, there is a law when you are in port and you have no pollution, then you get a discount on the T1 tax, on the vessel tax. So this is also, this is obviously a best practice that, for example, we do not have in Italy, and we are talking with the Italian government also to have there the same or something similar. Then is another point that is very important. We believe that the regulation needs to give the infrastructure, the good infrastructure to the shipping line. This is something that is very important because we are talking of many millions of investment. And obviously these investments are at the service of all the users of the city, of the port, of the same countries. And the ship owner needs in ports to have a good infrastructure.
Thank you, Mario. I think you've highlighted some great best practice there that is taking place in one location that can easily be, or hopefully be, transferred to others in order to be able to scale the best practice that you've seen and examples of the incentives that are needed. But I do want to bring in the role of ports, and hopefully we'll have Chrysanthi back from technical issues. But let's move to Luis from Barcelona to really provide us that perspective from the ports and how ports can prepare and support these first mover green corridor projects.
Thank you, Catherine, and good morning to everyone. From perspective of the port, the first thing we understand is that shipping is an industry. So we need to support this industry because this is the system we have to have our supply chains working. When there is a problem on that supply chain, just look at the current situation of the containers with all the problems we have, how the whole productive network of the world is suffering just because of there is some kind of disruption, right? So as a port, the first thing we have to do is help these shipping lines to be able to implement what is needed for zero emissions, right? We have to understand where we are coming from. We are coming from a moment on which we have had a big fight against pollution. Together with IMO, IMO has been able to put together all the stakeholders of the industry, shipping lines, ports, clients, authorities of every kind, to reduce the pollution. So we have changed the fuel and the emissions of nitrogen oxide, sulfur oxide, particulate matters have been reduced very, very, very much. I was sailing in the 80s, and I tell you the difference is humongous. It has nothing to do with what we were doing 40 years ago. But when we turn our back to the sea and we look into the city, which is, by the way, a few hundred meters from the port, at least here in Barcelona, we realize that the citizens, that the whole society is looking for this cutting of the greenhouse effect gases, right? So, and this is the next thing we have to do. This is what I understand these green corridors is all about, not just eliminating the pollution of the ships when they are approaching the city or the port or when they are alongside, but also protecting the environment of the whole world by limiting this greenhouse gas effect, right? So as a port, what we can do? We work very much in the availability of these new bunkers, right? In the ports, we have, for example, here in Barcelona, we have around 4 million cubic meters of liquid storage that at this moment is a petrochemical thing, but we understand one of the first steps we have to take is to start talking to these terminals, which are sitting in our grounds, to see how they could cope with these new bunkers coming in, with hydrogen, with ammonia, with any kind of fuel that could be used for a fuel cell system, right? Then we have to provide the infrastructures. We have to provide the pipes. We have to provide the proper places to berth for getting this kind of bunker, and also regulate that. We have the very recent experience of the LNG supply. We have been pioneering on that field, and we have here a barge that's providing LNG. We have a system to provide ferries with pressurized containers containing LNG as well. I mean, in that case would be CNG. And we've suffered firsthand the problems of sending this kind of dangerous goods into ships like ferries, like cruises. So the rules we have to set to operate this kind of things must be very strict, and we should know, all of us, we should know about what we are doing. On the other hand, as I said at the very beginning, this is an industry that's costing lots of money to make all these changes. And one of the things the port could do to help this modal change, let's say, is to apply rebates. At this moment in Barcelona, we are giving 40% discount to shipping lines which are not emitting pollution while alongside, and 30% to those using non-polluting bunker for sailing when they are in the sea. As Mario just said, the example of Grimaldi is paradigmatic. They have these ships fitted with batteries. So the whole call of the ship at the port is absolutely zero emissions. Of course, then they have to recharge these batteries. They do it with solar cells, but also with the engine. But it's very important to acknowledge these first steps. It's very important to recognize the effort of not just the shipping lines, but also the port, also the bunker suppliers, these companies which are working and investing lots of money in new fuels, biofuels, right? That should be very useful in the future. From the second presentation, I took the idea of this dividing the traffics in kind of ships and the importance of bulk carriers. I would like to give a little bit different approach, because here in Barcelona, we are the first port in Europe in handling cruises. At least we were before the pandemic, and we hope we will be back soon, right? As the person explaining, I'm sorry, I don't remember the name, as the person explaining the subject said, there is a number of ships which are operating from a single base. So cruise vessels and ferry vessels for shore sea shipping, they probably need only one single point for the route to get fuel.
Lewis, we're running a little bit out of time, and I'd like to. I think you've got some great insight points, and particularly looking at your insights that you've taken away from Camillo's presentation, and maybe that's something we can discuss with the two of you in the networking session. But I think Chrysanthi is back with us with her following her technical issues. Unfortunately, there's no video, but I would like to hear from Chrysanthi before we wrap up this first panel and move on to the second one. So Chrysanthi, I'll hand back to you just to provide your comments on the role of ports in the green corridors. Thank you.
Hello again. I hope to hear me well. And I'm sorry for the inconvenience with my connection problems. So actually, the ports, as I have already mentioned, they are at the crossroads of the supply chains. In parallel, we are with a strong connection with the local communities. The greening of shipping seems to be the primary goal, even for the ports. Reducing emissions at berth can contribute to this objective, albeit in a limited extent. It's not the only one, but it's a very significant parameter for that. In that purpose, it's desirable to start a gradual implementation of a common standard in order to reduce emissions at berth. As part of roadmap, ports, managing bodies should properly assess. The main challenge is the assessment of the need for investment in alternative fuel infrastructure on the basis of concrete criteria, such as the complete life cycle analysis for alternative fuels, including the production and the transportation up to the point of consumption. Actually, there is need for a well-to-wake life cycle approach. Also, the issues with the safety of bunkering operations and for infrastructure are a very significant parameter for the investment of the ports. And the technical maturity of the fuels beyond the showcase applications, for instance, the solution of ammonia or hydrogen have to be developed more in order to get in force. And the financial resource required to realize the necessary are one of the most significant requirements for the ports to realize the necessary investment. The assessment should take place in full respect of the competencies and responsibility of the ports. In this direction, in European level, the upcoming changes of the legislation framework with the Fit for 55 package that is prepared will set a goal-based and technology-neutral framework for the ports with a more clear orientation, and will help the ports to define the specific role for each key player with obligations, efforts, and motivations. For instance, the proper adjustments for fuel taxation system has to be prioritized for enabling the ports to construct a specific and efficient investment plan on installation. And of course, in this line, the most significant part will be the fuels market. The OPS solution seems to be the pioneer for the moment and the most promising, but has to be drawn attention on the parameters of performance. For instance, I talk as Piraeus Port. The OPS installations need to be developed in specific port terminals focused on specific use, container, passenger, cruise. And that means that have to be prior defined the way to the demand of the energy for each key user and for each installation. And the common way to define this demand is a very significant parameter for the investment plan of the port.
Thank you, Chrysanthi. I think
this is the whole presentation. Okay.
I'm very sorry. We are a little bit over time. So I don't mean to cut people short, but just want to make sure that all the panelists have opportunity to speak. And as we have the everyone coming back together for the breakout session for a further half an hour, we can do a much deeper dive into the specifics that that each panelist is raising. So, but I think what you've all said is, you know, there are some things that are very bespoke to the ferries sector, and then there are a lot of things that are very common. And, you know, talking about getting the technical maturity, getting that coordination and coherence around that direction of travel that that is needed is something which I think will take over into the second panel. So I'd like to very much thank the participants of the first panel, and as I said, everyone will be available for a further half an hour interaction in a breakout room where we can delve deeper into some of these observations that each panelist has raised. So thank you very much for your time, and we will see our panelists back in the breakout rooms in a few moments. So now I'd like to move on to panel 2, and this panel will focus more on the deep sea international trading shipping. So we will look more at containers, bulk carriers, and tankers, and to see if there are any differences with this sector to the challenges that were raised in the first panel. And joining this panel, we have 3 major ports and 1 fuel producer. So I'd like to start this this discussion by with a question to Cess from the Port of Rotterdam. So we're hearing that zero emission vessels will be ready in the next 2 to 3 years, but the main challenges are going to be the land-based supply of the fuel. So I'd like to ask, as the Port of Rotterdam, what is it that you're doing that can support in solving the supply and infrastructure challenge?
Oh, thank you, Catherine, and thank you for the invitation to this conference. Well, as every port, of course, the Port of Rotterdam is in energy transition. It means we will attract new industry in our port, industry that use electricity from wind farms at sea, electrolyzers to produce hydrogen. Of course, we have the production of biomethanol, we will have the production of green ammonia, but it is still enough. It's not enough to supply Europe with enough energy, so we also have to import energy by vessels. And vessels will carry ammonia, will carry hydrogen, will carry all kind of hydrogen carriers as well to bring energy to port. And it's very different how many different energy sources can be brought to our port. We have to store it, and we also will know that ships will sail on the new energy carriers. And of course, ports are a part of shipping lanes. Sometimes they are at the beginning, sometimes at the end, sometimes in the middle. So we are a part of the green corridors. So we have to make sure that green corridors can operate, and especially also for the large vessels like the tankers, the container vessels. In the port, a supply chain have to be established, a supply chain that will deliver energy to vessels. Please don't call it bunkering anymore, because a bunker, that's an storage for coal on steamships. I think that's the past. We now have to supply all kind of energy to vessels, and most of the vessels even need more supplies of different energy sources. So maybe some vessels will have ammonia as well as electrical, as well as hydrogen on board of a vessel. So don't call it bunkering anymore. We call it the supply of energy for the propulsion of vessels. But since we are a part of the corridors, since we are a part of the shipping lanes, the ports, of course, have to interact with the stakeholders that belongs to this value chain. So we talk with shipping lines, we talk with our stakeholders in a port, the industry. There is the knowledge to make it safe. That's important for a port, of course. Ports have to take care for governance. They have to take care of infrastructure, but they also have to take care of the safety of this delivering of energy to vessels. And there are some risks involved, of course, because you're talking about the transfer of energy in between a bunker vessel, an energy delivery vessel, to a receiving vessel, or from a storage on the shore to a receiving vessel. So we have to establish a supply chain, a safe supply chain that is covered by regulations, that's covered by a safety framework, and of course, without too much impact on the rest of the industry and the rest of the activities in our port. It means that, for instance, it must be possible to do an energy delivery to a vessel during the normal activities of this vessel. We call it simultaneous operations. It must be possible because shipping lines, they will not accept a delay for getting energy on board of their vessels. That's important. Those things should be covered with a safety framework. And therefore we need our own stakeholders, our own industry in our port, the knowledge from our own industry in the port. We need the knowledge from the shipping lines, but we also need the knowledge of other ports. So we are, as a port, in cooperation with a lot of other ports, like in branch organizations, for instance, International Association for Ports and Harbors, the SGMF, IMO, Global Industrial Alliances. There are many work groups, many programs we are a part of, just to make sure that we harmonize all regulations, that we make sure that we have the same incentives systems to make it possible for shipping lines to come to our ports. And of course, as a port, we are a part of programs of industry partners, programs of shipping lines, and part of consortia to establish those green corridors. Because as a port, you are only just a small part of the whole value chain. So we have to cooperate with the rest of the value chain. That's the most important message I like to bring here today during this conference. Thank you, Catherine.
Thank you very much. And I think you really have highlighted and summarized quite clearly the role of the port in the Green Corridor, and being part of the entire value chain, and the significance of your specific role around delivering safe supply chains to delivering energy to ships. So speaking of energy, I'll move now to Tessa from Yara as a potential producer of the energy for shipping. What is the role that and the action that Yara is taking to be able to create these new supply chains for new forms of energy for shipping?
Hey, good morning, everyone. Catherine, thank you for your question. I will be, or try to be, as complete as possible within the time limit of 5 minutes. Just so everybody is on the same page, and probably you are all aware of this, but just in case, Yara is effectively one of the largest fertilizer players in the world. And as such, a big part of the ammonia that is used within the fertilizer industry is effectively already produced by Yara. So having the molecule already within the portfolio of Yara, and also looking at our sustainability values and caring for the planet and prosperity as a result of the combination of two, in the beginning of this year, Yara Clean Ammonia was started, which is a separate business unit within Yara International. And the idea within this business unit is to really foster green ammonia or clean ammonia as a whole, as a fuel for the maritime industry as a starting point, and then later on for application within industries as well. As such, you might have seen that as well. Our CEO recently co-signed with many other companies the call for action to decarbonize shipping pretty soon. So we are quite committed to this ammonia-fueled future within the maritime business. Why ammonia, and what are we really pushing ammonia as a fuel? Well, it has a multitude of reasons. One of the main reasons is the energy density. We do believe that it's one of the only solutions for deep sea shipping. It is already a globally traded molecule. It doesn't contain CO2, and then obviously the scalability. Are there other concerns regarding toxicity, regarding the maturity of the engines, etc., for sure, but we believe that that can be mitigated with time and through proper collaboration. So what are we doing today? As I mentioned, Yara is already the largest ammonia producer in the world. Last year, we produced about 8.5 million tons in comparison to a global market of 35 million. And we also own our own trading arm. So we have 11 vessels within Yara as well. So what are we doing concretely now? We're looking at upstream projects, so really changing existing production capacity to green applications, so to green ammonia production capabilities and blue ammonia capabilities. So we have a project ongoing in the Pilbara region, which is Australia, really green production, so green ammonia production. We have another project ongoing in Sluiskil, and Sluiskil is the largest ammonia producing facility in Europe to also foster the production of green ammonia. And then the third layer project is in Porsgrunn, which is in Norway. So we're really looking at the producing side, the upstream side. What can we do in Yara to already facilitate the availability of the molecule? The target date for that is really 2023 and onwards. Obviously, the pipeline is a lot wider, but these are the better known projects. What are we doing on the user side? Because obviously that is also important. Collaboration is one of our core values, and particularly with this type of project, we believe it's necessary to bring different types of knowledge together at the same table. So we are part of the Castor initiative, and there the goal is really to build together a new build ammonia carrier, which is ammonia driven or a tanker. And this is together with an engine manufacturer, classification society, Singapore Port Authority, amongst other, and the shipyard. So it's really the entire supply chain within that specific project. We're also involved in a European funded project that was awarded about 10 million in subsidies to retrofit a offshore supply vessel, but the fueling system would be their ammonia-based fuel cells. And then obviously within that project, we're also looking into scalability. Can it be used for larger scale vessels, looking into bulkers and also looking into ro-packs? And then, probably you are also aware of the MOU that we have with Trafigura to effectively bring clean ammonia to the fueling market and the bunker market as a whole. So you can see that Yara is getting involved in the entire supply chain, really leveraging the history and the experience in producing, trading and shipping the molecule as a whole. And we are very much looking to positive collaborations to make this fuel a feasible and a real solution relatively short term, because if you look to the longer term and the true abatement of CO2 and emissions as a whole, by far green ammonia is the best solution. So that is in a nutshell an answer to your question.
Thank you, and that was really comprehensive. So lots of great projects to look at the availability of green ammonia, and lots of real examples of how you're working with the end user of the energy source to make sure that it is safe to use. So I think, you know, a common thread in the answers so far seems to be this cooperation and collaboration across the entire value chain. So moving on to Magnus. You're from the Associated Icelandic Ports, and Iceland has significant potential for renewable energy. So as a port association, how can you support the producer, as a producer and an exporter of potential energy for shipping?
Thank you, Catherine. Yes, Iceland is a source of renewable energy and hydro and geothermal, and this creates an opportunity for production of green hydrogen and hydrogen derivatives like ammonia and methanol. We as a port, we are a land developer and landowner as well in the port areas where we operate, and we see hydrogen production as an opportunity in one of our port areas, Grundartangi, which is about 30 kilometers north of Reykjavik. An industrial park has already been developed there with power-intensive users, so the infrastructure for power, etc., is in place, and even the possibility of capturing CO2 for potential methanol production. We are already in discussion with several parties about green hydrogen and ammonia production, and this is likely to be realized in the coming years. I would anticipate a first phase of 380-ish megawatt production with baseload from hydro and the rest from wind power, possibly online in 3 to 4 years. Yeah, we have signed MOUs with parties about this development, and this would be intended mainly for export to Europe, but at the same time as a potential source for energy transition at sea around our country, specifically directed at the Icelandic fishing vessel fleet. So our part in this will be to develop the land with the hydrogen producers, but we will be developing the port infrastructure to load vessels for export, and at the same time for bunkering, or sorry, chase source of energy, supply of energy. For the same e-fuel directly to vessels for consumption. I do not easily see that we will be investing in bunkering facilities for other e-fuels. We are investing in shore connections. We have connections for all smaller ships and for fishing vessels. We will be finishing a shore connection at our container terminal this year, and in the coming years for exploration ships and lastly for the bigger cruise ships. I am mentioning this as I could say that these are already high-risk investments, as at least the financial feasibility or payback is not obvious, but aside from the choices that will be made with hydrogen production, we will prioritize these investments over other high-risk bunkering investments with uncertainty about type of e-fuels.
Thank you. I think I said there's a lot of uncertainty about which fuels and where to put investment. But if I bring it in, Peter, from the Port of Antwerp as our final panelist, you know, the Port of Antwerp is also, aside from a major shipping hub, is also a major energy hub. So do you see synergies between both when it comes to being able to provide marine fuels?
Hi, Catherine. Thanks a lot for the introduction, and thanks a lot for the invitation. I must admit that it's hard to be original after having heard all the presentations before me, I've recognized many elements, which in a way confirm what Tessa also stated, that there's a need, and actually we're already doing that, a need for a cooperation across the value chain, between ports, between all different kinds of players. So that probably explains why there's so much overlap in all the elements that have been stated. But before I answer your question about Port of Antwerp being an energy hub, let me put that in perspective. Because if you look at it from a global scale, Port of Antwerp is very closely located to Rotterdam, Amsterdam, Zeebrugge, Le Havre, which in a way you could consider as one bunkering hub. And to put it in case words, thanks for introducing the terminology, Case. The energy supply vessels that are operational in our port in Antwerp, they are currently also operational in the very nearby ports. That means literally that the licenses that have been granted to such vessels, and I'm talking specifically about LNG bunkering vessels, they are also valid in the nearby ports, and that's because of the ports really cooperating. So for a bunker vessel or an energy supply vessel, it's not just the Port of Antwerp that's their operational area, but they just move between the ports. And then regarding the supply, well, the current primary supply for a Port of Antwerp, which is not just a logistical port, but there's also a major industrial complex. It's provided by electricity, heat, fossil fuels, and fossil feedstock. And indeed, when transforming the port into an climate neutral port, it's not just about shipping, but also about transforming the industry, and there's pretty much of synergies. But the point, as also pointed out by Case, is that we won't be able to produce all the necessary energy locally. So it will be about importing hydrogen from areas where there's lots of wind and sun. It will be about capturing CO2 in our port, exporting that, or trying to transform that locally into fuels such as methanol, etc. So that's really actions that we are focusing on in our port. And then so much for the supply side. With regard to the demand side, next to a landlord and a regulator, Port of Antwerp is also an operator. We also operate 30 vessels ourselves, mainly tugboats. And we are introducing hydrogen and methanol into that fleet by a number of pilot projects. But I recall from the earlier presentation by Mr. Perico that the reduction potential for such service vessels like tugboats is really limited if you compare it to bulk carriers, containers, or ferries. So the question is, why do we actually invest in such negligible impact vessels? Well, the point is that by doing that, we demonstrate also the introduction of such new fuels in the port community, which is a very local story. And it's also about making terminals aware about the introduction of new fuels. It's about making all the local authorities aware of that. So that's, even though the impact of this very project might be very, very small, we do believe it's a leverage to make the entire community aware of the actual transition by demonstrating it, by showing tangible results.
Thank you very much. I think you're right that that going last minute, you know, you can sort of agree and see those observations have been raised by other parties. So I think it's great that there's a lot of common issues that have been raised, and this theme of cooperation and collaboration across the value chain, and also, you know, that this is going to be a multi-fuel future. And how ports have have to prepare for a multi-fuel or multi-energy source future. So I'd like to thank our panelists of the second panel. There is, our panelists will be available in the networking session, so you can ask them more questions, ask them questions and delve deeper into some of the points that they have raised. So I would like to move on to our last session of the conference by introducing Matthew Moss, the Knowledge Transfer Manager from KTN, who's going to take us through some of their work. So over to you, Matthew.
Thank you very much, Catherine, and thank you for the invitation to sort of present today. I've got a very easy job of kind of introducing the topic, but the really interesting stuff comes after me. So please continue to listen to me, but you know you're in store for a nice surprise at the end. So let me just begin by sharing my video. So you can see my lovely green slides, very apt for this event, green slides for green corridors. So as been kindly introduced by Catherine, I'm Matthew Moss, and I am indeed the Maritime Lead at KTN. So a little introduction to KTN first, because I know many of you on the call will be thinking, who are we and how are we relevant in terms of green corridors and the Clean Maritime Demonstration competition in particular. So if my slides do move on, there we are. So who are we? KTN are a UK-based company. We are a private but not-for-profit organisation, and our main goal is to connect innovative people and organisations together to drive positive change and ultimately bring benefit to UK PLC. So made up of about 200 people spread across the UK, and we have experts. I'm the maritime expert, but we have experts in every sector the UK operates in. So whether that's materials, manufacturing, medicine, transport, health, you name it, we've probably got someone who has an inroad into those many sectors that are operating in the UK. So what exactly do we do? So this diagram sums it up quite nicely. So that main point at the beginning, the connecting piece, that is our bread and butter. We essentially network for you. We are experts, know everyone else in their sector. So if you were to come to me and say, hi, Matt, I'd like to speak to a shipping company, I can probably put you in contact with many shipping companies that are out there. In the UK, I should emphasize that we're heavily UK based, and we work very closely along with UK government, particularly Department for Transport and Innovate UK in my case, to raise awareness for the various funding opportunities and innovation money that is out there to help you take your great, amazing idea through sort of the concept stage, through to a demonstrator, and then ultimately through to commercialization. And that's what we do. We sort of guide you on this research and development journey. So that's enough about KTN and me. I think we want to get into the juicy subject, which is the Clean Maritime Demonstration competition. So this was a competition run by the Department for Transport, and that was in collaboration with Innovate UK. So it was a £20 million grant funding competition that was announced in Boris Johnson's 10-point plan for a green industrial revolution back in November of last year. And the aim was to help the UK maritime sector transition towards net zero as set out in the UK government's Clean Maritime Plan. And if you know a little bit about UK politics, you'll know that we have a spending review every 3 or 4 years, but because of Brexit, sorry to mention that, I think that's the first time on the call, and also the pandemic, we only had a 1-year spending review, which meant that innovation and funding was only available for 1 year. So that's quite short in terms of innovation, especially if we're trying to think about decarbonising a sector as large as the maritime sector. 1 year and £20 million is probably not going to go a long way in enabling that transition to net zero, but it's very much desired by the Department for Transport to be a springboard programme to really kickstart the maritime sector into thinking, right, we need to do something, and we need to do something now. So we know a little bit about the competition. What were the outcomes? Who were the winners? And you're going to hear from 4 of the winners after I've finished rambling on. So the great news was that this competition was over 225% oversubscribed. And I think that's more important than the winners itself. It just shows that the appetite the UK maritime sector has in wanting to transition towards net zero and really put green maritime on the map. Overall, there were 55 winning projects, and they were split into 2 strands. So there was a feasibility study strand, which is predominantly a desk-based research, and 39 winners there. And then 16 more of the strand 2 demonstrator projects that are actually looking to do and implement something, even a prototype at the end. There's also some more good news, is that in total, even though it was a £20 million competition, Department for Transport managed to find an extra 3 million to put towards this, and that was due to sort of the quality of applicants that were in there. They were able to find a little bit of extra money in order to fund more of these wonderful innovations. And that 23 million was matched by a further 10 million from industry, showing again that there's a keen impetus within the sector to invest in clean maritime technology. And it's important to note that there were winners throughout the UK. So it's, and including the devolved administrations, so that's Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland for our European colleagues. The projects are only kicked off at the beginning of September, so we're in very early stages at the moment, and they're going to run until the 31st of March. We'd hope to be invited back to be able to present some of the outcomes of those in 7 months' time, so we can say what the projects have actually done. But I'm going to end there and then hand over to Rachel Connors from GE, who's going to give us our first presentation on her winning project there. And then she's got about 5 minutes, and then we'll go through some of the other winners to just outline what they're planning to do over the next 7 months. There's a lot to fit in that time. So Rachel, over to you for the first presentation.
Thanks for the invitation this morning. It's great to be with everyone and to hear the interesting comments and panelists so far. So if this session has been about accelerating the transition to zero emissions, then part of that is about technology investment. So let me just share my screen as well with you. We're thinking about accelerating the transition to zero emissions, then part of that is about technology investment. We know that it's about driving up technology readiness levels across a number of cleaner energy measures, and you can see those on the slide there about the inherent technology, new energy sources, new fuels, more effective power dense electrical machines, that kind of thing. Also thinking about energy efficiency of that grid on the ship, and the intelligent digital solutions that we can bring to energy management as well, in this kind of basket of technologies that can reduce emissions, as well as reducing the demand from the ship itself. But we've all got these roadmaps, right? Whether we're governments, operators, industry, class societies, and working on this Clean Maritime project allows us to think how we get off that paper roadmap and into an operational scenario to support acceleration. We believe it's about collaborating across the push of technology from technology providers like us and our partners, but also it's about the pull of technology in use to help accelerate readiness and adoption. And that involves a whole range of considerations that you can see at the bottom of the page about we have to collectively invest in both of those. And not least because a lot of clean energy measures to date have been initiated from technology on land that doesn't necessarily transport onto a ship with all the constraints that we have about operating standards, safety, space constraints, etc., etc. So we take this approach where we look at technology readiness and systems readiness and thinking about those factors. Sorry, I'm not with it this morning, so I'll give you a second just to absorb that page and try and catch up with myself. So yeah, we looked at the different measures, and that technology readiness and system readiness are important. And there's all this stuff to work on at the bottom of the page that you can see that we need to do to actually accelerate adoption. I really am with it now. Okay, so our two projects, we're delighted to be working with some partners and teams that can actually cover this whole spectrum from technology right through to end user operators, and advisory capabilities that can come together on this project. Industry is certainly investing in new technologies and measures to clean up the maritime sector. But thanks to the Department for Transport and the Clean Maritime Project, it allows us potentially to do more and to do it faster. We can, with our partners, try and take a real project approach, which I think is super important, you know, that we look at technology in use. And programs like Clean Maritime allow us to have this kind of safe learning environment, if you like. And I can't imagine that on a normal commercial project, either our end user partners, the operators, or technology providers would be happy with perhaps the levels of risk involved. So we've got this safe kind of place to play, but approaching it with a real commercial mindset and thinking about real adoption measures. Okay. So first project we're working on is about integrating fuel cells onto a larger ship. There have been quite a few studies and demonstrators on often on smaller vessels, but not thinking perhaps so much about how we actually integrate into a real existing ship design and considering elements about type of fuel and the realities of logistics. And I know we can't call it bunkering anymore, but you know, the realities of how we provide fuel on a ship. So we're working with a partner, Ceres, who has a solid oxide fuel cell that has multi-fuel options. In this case, looking at LNG, which can share the ship's existing fuel environment. And looking at those trade-offs, so space constraints, integrating with the existing electric grid on the ship, thinking about how much power we can get from that space, how it works functionally with the rest of the ship. If we know how much power we can get, what can it do functionally within the ship's power demand for auxiliary power or propulsion? And scalable to a lot of different ship types. So we're really excited about that. And the final project, which you had the pleasure of looking at for a few minutes, is our vertically integrated cloud-based port project. And we're delighted to be working with PD Ports and our other partners to think about the electrification of ports. And if we're going to see electrical demand go up at ports, I think it's a message we heard this morning, then how can we manage that electrical capacity most effectively in that port's kind of microgrid, making sure that there's enough capacity to meet demand. And part of that is that energy management and a digital solution that allows us to understand the demand and the supply within the port's microgrid, thinking about potential energy savings and having a cloud-based model that can allow the port to be operating as effectively as possible. So really exciting over the next few months, a really fast push, and I will hand over to the next speaker.
Thank you very much, Rachel, and apologies, we have to kind of rush you through your presentation.
No, if I'd got myself sorted, it would have been better.
But fear not, everyone, if you have questions for Rachel, all our presenters today from the Clean Maritime Demonstration Competition are going to be available in breakout rooms, so please do come and chat to them. So next up, presentation from James McGarley of Blue Water Engineering. James, welcome. You're on mute.
So thank you very much, Matt, for the introduction. Thank you to the team at the Foreign Office for arranging this session, and thank you to everybody for attending. It's good to see you here. I must say I'm glad to hear in all of the maritime discussions that I've attended recently, both virtual and in person at Shipping Week in London a couple of weeks ago, the enthusiasm for decarbonisation now. It's no longer a question of whether we should be decarbonising shipping or at what point in the future we should begin. It's really about how do we do it and how can we do it even faster. I think Catherine made a very good point earlier as well, which is that the majority of the challenge in decarbonisation is very much in the land-based infrastructure. When you're looking at alternative fuels and you're looking at how to produce them and distribute them and store them and get them on board ships, that is a massive challenge as compared to the development of the propulsion systems. I know the likes of Wärtsilä are already looking at already running prototype ammonia engines, and we've got methanol engines and LNG blend type transition technologies coming through. So that bit's making good progress, but the infrastructure side is frankly terrifying. I read a story the other day about Maersk and their new methanol fueled container ships they have on order, about 8 of those. And I haven't verified this, but I think it's entirely plausible what I read, which was that the energy requirement to produce that fuel amounts to Denmark's total current wind energy output. And that means that scaling that up to take into account the tens of thousands of ships operating around the world and the renewable energy infrastructure that we would need to back that up, especially with the inefficiencies in distribution and storage and losses and propulsion efficiency along the line, means we really need to ramp up not just distribution infrastructure, but energy production infrastructure in competition with everything else. So ammonia is great, but it's used as a fertilizer, and we need to green all of that first. Electricity is used for many things and will be used for many more. So there's going to be real pressure on infrastructure. And that's why I think the focus, or a strong part of the focus, needs to be on what we can do at sea to make that situation better, to alleviate the pressure on infrastructure development. And wind is very much one of those things. Wind energy, as we've seen from the offshore renewable sector, is a growing and powerful contribution to the energy mix, and it can be cost competitive with fossil fuels when deployed at scale. And the same applies in shipping. If you use it as direct propulsion, as has been seen in a number of different concepts over recent years, you're getting a really efficient source of energy there. Yes, the wind doesn't blow all the time, but when it does, making use of that can save you a lot of fuel consumption, which is relevant obviously to carbon emissions in the short term, but is perhaps even more relevant in the future, because if you accept it as a given that we are going to transition to green fuels and we're going to transition to a largely hydrogen-based economy, and we're going to have these synthesized e-fuels powering our ships, then the commercial advantage of wind is huge. Fuel is never going to be as cheap as it is now. Green fuels of the future are going to be more expensive, and wind is going to be an indispensable part of the propulsion solution for ships. Having said all that, there is a very big challenge with it, because we're not talking about the Cutty Sark anymore. We're not talking about old sailing ships, which were designed to proceed under sail with a relatively long, large ship compared to the size of cargo it was carrying. Modern ships are really focused around cargo at the expense of a lot of other things. So they're high drag. You need a lot of power to pull them along. And there's not a lot of space besides cargo space. So when you're looking at Flettner rotors and you're looking at wing sails and all those shipboard systems, you really struggle to pack in enough power. And secondly, it means you need to make a retrofit. We can't solve this shipping problem just by building new ships. Firstly, the construction has a carbon footprint, but also the existing fleet is going to be around for quite some time. And even ships which are built over the next 10 years, which continue to be fossil fueled, will be around for another 25 years beyond that. So we need to focus on what we can do for existing ships. And that's where SkyTug comes in. So as I've been talking for the last couple of minutes, no doubt you've seen the picture on the slide here. And that illustrates basically what the concept is. It sort of speaks for itself, I think. So I'll just flick on to the next of my slides here. I think just to recap there, the pressure on to decarbonize is huge. We've got really good motion in various sectors. In finance, we've got the Poseidon principles. In chartering, we've got the Sea Cargo Charter. We've got the EU taking steps of its own, the UK and the US equally pushing forward, and the IMO hopefully catching up. And we've got the prospect of carbon levies. We've got the prospect of prices going up due to regulation or due to the introduction of new fuels, and all that opens space for wind. And there's also a large market, which I believe has been mentioned today, and it's but it's one of the most difficult to address. The ferries and the port infrastructure and the kind of short sea shipping is probably a really good bit of low-hanging fruit to deal with by electrification and by fuel cells, batteries. But the bulk of shipping worldwide is general cargo, bulk or tanker. 80% of the world's ton miles are in those fields. And so, you know, those big heavy ships doing long ocean journeys are where we really need to focus to make the biggest carbon reductions. So what's SkyTug then? SkyTug is basically a way of breaking down those technical and commercial barriers. There isn't space aboard a ship to pack enough wind power in to propel it at normal speed without using some kind of extra propulsion. Realistically, you can get maybe 20% fuel saving from onboard wind power systems, but little more, except with a brand new designed ship. And even then, you're looking at, you know, less than half. So we need to move away from doing that on board ship. We need to move it into a separate tug vessel, which can pack in as much wind power as you really need to propel that ship 100% in the right wind conditions. And in doing so, you also get an even bigger commercial benefit, which is that ship owners don't have to make a very tricky and very expensive capital equipment investment decision. And that really gives you the opportunity to provide something as a service, provide something as a pay-by-the-joule energy-based system, much like a fuel. And that opens up massively the opportunities for wind. So what we've got here is a multi-kite array, which generates sufficient wind power to pull that ship along in wind speeds up to above force 3 and above, so about 7 knots and above, at full speed, without it using a scrap of alternative propulsion. You know, that's the target. And as I say, bulk and tanker offers a huge opportunity, not just because it's the biggest sector of the market, but also because the speed that these ships travel at is more compatible with wind propulsion than the faster container and ferry ships, for reasons of true and apparent wind and angles. So this has the potential to deliver, you know, real change in shipping without infrastructure requirements other than building building tugs and basically replacing aerofoils and parts. And so we're working on this with the help of the funding from the Department for Transport through the CMDC. We have a grant of just over 600K to enable us to deliver the feasibility, sort of advanced feasibility study on this. And that involves us at Blue Water Engineering working alongside our partners Ice Marine Design in naval architecture, Bruce Goldsmith Design, who are a company that do paraglider and kite design and have a lot of experience and capability and software in that field, and Bainbridge International, who are sailcloth manufacturers and experienced sail designers. So watch this space over the next 7 months. We'll keep updating the public as to how the project is progressing, and hopefully by March we will have demonstrated feasibility in enabling technologies of this system with a view to, in future, putting that together into a demonstrator and going to sea. And with that, I'll hand it back to Matt, and any questions that anybody has, I'll be happy to answer them in the breakout rooms later.
Thank you very much, James. And moving swiftly on, and again, James will be available in the breakout rooms. So next is Simon Barnes of the University of Kent to present his project. Simon.
So this is a project that's funded by the Department of Transport that involves the University of Kent, Port of Dover, P&O Ferries, Warwick Manufacturing Group and Schneider Electric. The image you can currently see in you is a new P&O class ferry that will arrive in the port next year. These ferries have been designed as hybrid ferries, and they are basically designed to run on electric whilst they're in port and manoeuvring, and then they'll run on the hybrid diesel power generation whilst they're in the open water. And they're forecast to save around about 40% of carbon emissions vis-a-vis a current diesel-only ferry. The challenge that we have is how do we potentially make these ferries all electric? And so what the group's looking at as part of this feasibility study is really to understand the exact energy requirements of a cross-channel ferry and how much energy we can get on board in the port area. Firstly, just a little bit about Dover, because I think it's important in this context, and we've heard this morning. So the short straits, or the Port of Dover, handles about 122 billion pounds of trade a year, 17% of the UK's goods, and 4.5 million freight vehicles, including 2.4 million freight vehicles. And I think the context of this that's important is to explain that actually pressure on the marine sector may well come from supply chains, from businesses who want to identify they can get to net zero ahead of our deadlines, and they will want to see net zero logistics solutions. So the pressure on Dover and the ferry companies is to do this because they're in competition with the Channel Tunnel, which is effectively already, due to French nuclear power, a net zero option. So there's real pressure on the maritime sector in Kent to come up with solutions. But we have a problem in terms, or a challenge in terms of Dover. And that's based around a number of things. We've heard about legacy vessels in terms of the length of time. Ferries are designed to operate for between 30 and 40 years. And therefore, we've got to also understand what energy options we can have for those legacy vessels, as well as the new ones that are arriving. The sheer volume of energy required is significant. We think, and this is what the study will show, up to these vessels will consume up to 8 megawatts of electricity. And we just know, or we're very aware, that the national grid in Dover will just not simply be able to supply sufficient electricity. So we need to understand what that gap is. The other problem we have ferries in the short straits is that they're only alongside for around about 40 minutes at a time. And so we've got the logistical problem of how do we get energy on board, electrical energy in particular, what equipment do we need and how to achieve that? It may even be we have to consider roll-on, roll-off 40-foot ISO containers or battery containers that we charge away from the port. We drive them onto the ferry and we plug them in. Vessels currently, and forgive the word bunker, they currently bunker once a week. And so this is a complete change in the way that they're going to get their energy on board. They will need to do that somehow or other, probably at the end of each crossing. And we really need to understand how we can do that and design the alternative systems. And then lastly, there's the cost and operating regime for these systems. That really goes back again to Maritime being able to demonstrate net zero, but also be able to do it at a cost that's achievable within the whole supply chain. So what we aim to do here is we want to understand the forecast demand for electric power from the new hybrid ferries and understand the future of electrification of diesel ferries. So actually, how much energy do we need to make a net zero solution for Dover to Dunkirk and Calais? We need to be able to identify potential supply chains based on local energy generation and storage. So we do have offshore wind farm in Kent, so we do have clean energy that's available. But the challenge of how we get that on board to the ships is going to be a difficult one. What we'd like to do in the longer term really is develop a roadmap or a pathway. And it's interesting that we have a partner in our program from Warwick Manufacturing Group who are very experienced in automotive and automotive batteries and can share some of that experience and some of the technology development pathways into our project. And that's what we really want to do in the next stage, is understand how we can actually get an operational setting and a demonstrator to see how we can get energy on board the ferries. We want to produce as well, I should say here, a kind of a model that we would be more than happy to share after the project with other ferry operators and ports, that they can understand and develop their own numbers to take our learnings and share them with the rest of them. Because finally, to say, we'll only solve this problem by collaboration. So the collaboration between the university and operators and technology providers is really the way to show the sector forward, I would say. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Simon. And on that point of collaboration, please come and speak to Simon in the breakout rooms afterwards. So our final CMDC winning project is from CMB Tech, and I believe Alex, you're going to give us the presentation today.
Thanks, Matthew. I'll just attempt to share my screen. Okay, is that good for everyone?
Perfect.
Okay. So yeah, thanks for the opportunity to speak today. I must apologise on behalf of Paul. He's been called away on some urgent business, so I'm his stand-in for today. So I hope I can be just as entertaining. So just to run through our project, I'll let an introduction to the company first. So we're a division of CMB, which is a family-owned shipping company. So I work for the CMB.Tech division, which is the R&D arm of the company. But generally, we're a ship owner, and that ranges from the bulk carriers in the Bossamar fleet to the chemical tankers in the Bochem. We've got container vessels in the Delphis fleet. And this goes all the way down to the pre-transfer vessels in the Windcat workboats fleet. You can see just an image in the bottom right. So they're the leading operator of crew transfer vessels in Europe. So the CMB.Tech, the clean tech division. So our main area of operation is in our office in Brentwood, just outside of London in the UK. So we've got over 15 years experience of working with hydrogen as a fuel, mainly focused on combustion, both dual fuel with diesel and monofuel. So just generally, I'll move that marker. So already shipping is, as an industry, is quite used to dealing with fuel transitions. So vessels have had to leave ports in the past where they've bunkered, if that's the right term, sorry, Case, bunkered fuels where there's not been existing infrastructure around the world, and they've just had to make that transition. So in the past it was wind, we moved on to coal, then diesel, and then we've got the next transition to cleaner fuels. So a description of our project. We are taking learning from the experience we've already gained bunkering hydrogen from previous projects, and we're developing the next technology in usable bunkering. So here's an image of the bunkering we've done in the past. So you can see in the bottom right of the image is the Hydroville, which is a vessel we launched in 2017, which is dual fuel technology, so diesel and hydrogen. And with that vessel, we just bunkered using standard industrial gas tube trailers. So 200 bar pressure, you're essentially connecting up the systems and bottle balancing between the trailer and the vessel. As a next phase, we've developed the first refueling station in the world that you can both refuel road vehicles in the forecourt, you can see in the image, and also vessels on the side there. So this technology is basically an increased scale of the standard automotive refueling technology where you do cascade refueling at 350 bar. So what we've got the funding for is applying that automotive technology from the refueling station, which is an automated cascade, and putting that onto a mobile refueling trailer that can be used, moved around ports, and can actually refuel our vessels. Just to complete the full picture, we're conscious that we're cleaning up the vessel side, but we also need to clean up the distribution side for the trailer itself. So as part of our portfolio, we've developed a dual fuel truck, which you can see in the image. So we've got high pressure hydrogen cylinders running up the back of the cab, and a dual fuel engine, so diesel and hydrogen. So we're really cutting down the emissions and the overall emissions of the operation of that vessel. And the application, we're actually developing the Hydrocat, which is a dual fuel variant of a windcat vessel you see here. So we're using the same technology, dual fuel combustion with diesel. This vessel will be going in sea trials within the coming weeks, and it'll be operating out of UK ports. So the trailer we'll develop will be for, well, to support the operation of that vessel. And that's me, short and sweet. I hope I'm in the time limit.
No, that's perfect, Alex. Thank you very much. It was well within the time. So that concludes the presentations from the CMDC winners. We're going to hand back to Catherine now to do some closing remarks before we head off into the breakout session. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Matt, and thank you to all the presenters in that session. It was great to hear of all the action that is already being taken, and I really look forward to being able to see the outcomes of these projects when we're at stages where we can start to share what is being learned and how we take these potential solutions forward so they can be scaled. I think it's been a great pleasure to moderate this conference this morning. I think to hear from each of the speakers, and what I take away from it is that action is being taken. I think, to move from ambition to commitments and convert that into action is being clearly demonstrated from everyone here today. And so, in my main takeaways are that, collaboration and cooperation across the whole value chain is critical to the success of being able to scale and some of these projects that are taking place. I think everyone understands the role, the various actors across that value chain. We all understand the role that we have and the contribution that we can bring, and everyone is working towards that common goal. So I think as we, as shipping transitions to zero, and as we move through this, this transition will become a multi-fuel sector, where different fuels may be more appropriate for different parts of the shipping industry. And as we see, different parts of the shipping industry may move at different paces, but we're all working together for that same common goal, and the fact that learnings can be transferred from different sectors, learnings can be transferred from those first mover projects to everyone else. And so I think in that spirit of cooperation and collaboration, I think this has been a great conference. So I'd like to thank you, all of the panelists. I'd like to thank all the audience for listening to us. And I'd like to now move into the breakout rooms. So you actually have to leave this Zoom session and click on the other Zoom link that is in your registering email. And when you get into that, you can then select the breakout rooms, and there will be one for each of our two presenters this morning, so Joe and Camilio. There will be breakout rooms for the specific projects that have been presented, and then there'll be a breakout room for each of the two panel sessions where you can meet the panelists and ask them questions. So I just wrap up by saying thank you very much, and I look forward to seeing you in the breakout rooms. So thank you.